All right, well, hi everyone. My name is Patricia Tillman. I'm a research associate with the National Wildlife Federation, and I'm pleased to speak with you today. I've been working for the past 3 years in the North Pacific Landscape Conservation Cooperative region to understand climate change impacts, possible adaptation approaches, and identify practitioner needs. Today I'm going to focus on our efforts to understand and respond to the ways in which climate change will affect the ability of the region's resource managers, conservation practitioners, and researchers to do their work. And where I want to start is by talking about why this work is important and relevant. And it's quite simply because climate change affects the people, places, and resources we care about. I've been fortunate the past 3 weekends to spend time up on Mount Rainier. And when I wasn't trudging up a hill enjoying it, or breathless and speechless and really thoughtless with the beauty, I couldn't help thinking every once in a while, what are these meadows and tundra going to look like in 20 years? How will they have changed? And how will we as a society have responded to the changes that are coming? And knowing that this talk was coming up, I also began to think about how our resource managers and conservation practitioners have really long been managing and protecting and advocating for the wildlife and habitats that we hold so dear amid a wide variety of stressors, and now they're doing it with this additional stressor of climate change. So then that gets me thinking about the kinds of science, information, and tools they need in order to address climate change in their work, and how planning and management will change as a result. And those are the kinds of questions that the North Pacific Landscape Conservation Cooperative, or NPLCC, is asking. They want to know what kinds of information, and specifically what science and traditional ecological knowledge NPLCC partners need in order to address climate change in their work. They want to know how they can best support these needs through strategic investments in time, effort, and resources. And informing these questions was the express purpose and goal of this project. And it's the first such project to address these questions at the scale of the North Pacific LCC. And being the first project of its nature, we really wanted to hear directly from the perspectives of the professionals working to incorporate climate change in their work in the region. So we wanted to know, what are the challenges and opportunities associated with managing ecosystems, habitats, and species in light of current and projected climate change effects? What is the decision relevance, spatial scale, temporal scale, timeline, and sense of urgency in addressing these challenges and opportunities? And which partners of ongoing efforts are currently available to assist with these issues? And the second and third questions are really intended to provide the NPLCC with information about what, where, when, and under what conditions they can best respond to the challenges and fulfill the needs emerging in the region. In order to begin to address these questions, we sent out invitations to a wide variety of people, and about half of them actually ended up participating in the project, which is pretty good. We heard from 195 natural and cultural resource managers, conservation practitioners, and researchers working throughout the region, and we made every effort to have a representative sample. And it was fairly well distributed by geography, meaning that approximately the same number of people were represented from each state, province, and tribes and First Nations. Fairly well distributed also by the type of organization they worked for, and that included federal agencies, non-governmental organizations, tribes and First Nations, as well as state agencies and academic institutions. We also wanted to be representative in terms of the kind of ecosystem people tended to work in the most. In this regard, there was an emphasis on marine and coastal ecosystems versus the terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems. Each of the 195 participants had an opportunity to participate in one or more of 17 venues throughout the project. And these included a survey. This is the broadest level of inquiry we had, where we asked generally about the challenges and opportunities associated with addressing climate change in their work. Then we went to a series of 13 web-based focus groups that asked a few more targeted questions focused on the biogeographic subregion in which the people worked. And finally, we invited them to 3 in-person workshops where we asked even more targeted questions, and these were focused on the NPLCC region as a whole, and on beginning to really think about which needs the NPLCC might be best suited to fulfill. And what this generated in terms of results was, at first, was really a whole lot of content. So I mean words and text through the survey responses and the focus group transcripts and the worksheet documents. And so we analyzed that content using a qualitative approach. And the most important thing to note about this approach is that being the first time we asked these questions, we really wanted to do an analysis that let the perspectives of the participants speak for themselves and really speak through us, and doing everything we could to remove ourselves, the researchers, from the analysis, so reducing the interpretation and being more of a channel for the results. Once we had a long list of potential priority or potential needs and kinds of projects and activities that people were looking for, we then asked the question, well, which of these may be emerging as more important across the region? And to get a sense, to answer that question, we looked at how frequently a particular request for a need or a project was made across the 17 venues, and how repeatedly a request was made within any particular venue. In completing these analyses, we really identified 6 broad challenges and 4 core needs emerging in the region. The challenges fall fairly neatly into technical and non-technical challenges. Technical challenges are things like being overwhelmed by the amount of information that is out there and one's ability to make use of it and understand it. It also includes how to deal with the wide variety of types of uncertainty associated with addressing climate change. On the non-technical side, it's challenging sometimes to deal with the realities of institutional and social barriers, or with inadequate collaboration, or with competing priorities and insufficient mainstreaming. And mainstreaming is a term that refers to when you incorporate climate change into a process. Mainstreaming means that incorporating climate change becomes just a part of the way that business is done, essentially a new normal. And this is an area where there's actually a lot of room for growth. Moving on to the 4 core needs, a couple of items I want to note here. First, I hope you can see a really direct link from the challenges on the previous slide and the core needs here. For example, in response to inadequate collaboration, people ask for more collaboration and capacity building. The other item I'd like to note, and that I will continue to note throughout the presentation, is that most of these core needs are actually non-technical in nature. When it comes to providing the support that participants need to address climate change in their work, they're really looking for non-technical items. It's number 3 that's really the technical request. And I just want to note that in addition to these core needs, there were a number of specific projects and activities requested that fell pretty neatly into 17 activity areas. I'm not going to focus on them today because I want to focus on these 4 core needs, but I'd be happy to take questions or direct anyone to other resources. So our first core need is facilitating the development or dissemination of decision support systems and tools. And this was a non-technical core need requested in all 17 venues. And venues, again, are the survey, the 13 focus groups, and the 3 workshops. And these really fell into 2 kind of broad areas. The first are visualization tools. And these really maybe have been requested because visual displays of information are really a way that many of us understand things best. Examples of this include maps, models, and other three-dimensional animations of change. The other broad area requested of assistance was a climate change vulnerability assessment. And a vulnerability assessment is just one of many steps in incorporating climate change in a planning process or a management scheme. It's typically conducted fairly early on, but can be done at any point to kind of check in. And can be done, in fact, over time to reassess your outcomes. And people felt that vulnerability assessment was really important because it helped defend and prioritize their work early on, and they also really saw it as a critical step in addressing climate change. And this is what you need in order to get to that critical stage of identifying and implementing adaptation actions. The second core need is facilitating collaboration and capacity building. This is also a non-technical core need and was cited in 15 of 17 venues. On collaboration, this is about connecting and leveraging people, projects, institutions, and funding. This may, in fact, be a role that the NPLCC is well suited for because it crosses so many jurisdictional lines, not just states and provinces and countries, but also departments and agencies. In terms of capacity building, people asked for actionable information. And that means that when, for example, a data set or a model is produced, that when it's all said and done, it's it's pretty much ready right away to be inserted into a decision-making process. That's something that's typically difficult to do and tends to require that the data producer and data user work closely together. They also requested guidance, for example, in doing the vulnerability assessments they'd like to see done, and in providing examples of adaptation and action. And Amy Snover gave a sense of this in terms of case studies and success stories, because people really want to learn how others are addressing climate change and also have some sense that progress can be made. Finally, synthesis products. These are things like a climate clearinghouse, which is simply a database, or an online portal where you can find simple information about people, the kinds of projects they're working on, and how to get in touch with them, just to get through that first step of identifying collaborators. The third core need, this is the technical need of the group and was requested in 15 of 17 venues as well. So it's about providing new or different data, science, and information. The MPLCC being a science management partnership and really intending to connect science with the management on the ground, in that framework it meant that there were a few principles for providing this information that participants requested. And those included a focus on actionable information, which I just mentioned, and then that then requires typically developing that information in concert with decision makers. The final thing is that when the new information is being produced, that it be compatible with existing resources, and that's simply so that participants have access to all of the resources out there. Examples fall into 4 categories. So under fundamental and baseline data, we have streamflow trends, for example, models and downscaling, for example, regional ocean conditions, climate and socioeconomic scenarios, which kind of give a sense of possible likely futures and can aid in decision making. And then finally, some sense of the cost of action or inaction on climate change. The last area is improving science communication and outreach. This is also a non-technical core need and was requested in 11 of 17 venues. And this is simply because a lot of participants struggle to communicate effectively with the audiences they're trying to reach. What came up over and over again was this request for good, consistent language. And then to connect, when we talk about ecological impacts, which we're very familiar with, how this affects ecosystems and wildlife, to then connect that with the impacts on the economy and on human communities and people's social world. Visualization came up again, that where possible, these materials should be provided in a visual and interactive format. And finally, all good communication and outreach should be targeted to the audience. And those audiences included the participants themselves and their peers and colleagues, that's the first bullet there, as well as decision makers, educators, and the public. And so in conclusion, the message I'd like to leave you all with is that for the people working on climate change in this region, what they requested more often than not to help them make decisions was the non-technical items, not necessarily the science, data, and information that is commonly thought to be the dominant need. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and attention. I'd like to acknowledge our funders, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the North Pacific Landscape Conservation Cooperative. And I want to make sure to thank my co-author, Dan Seaman, and our project partners and participants. And I'm going to leave you with some thoughts from our participants, and thank you very much.